Hey, can you hear me? Okay, so I guess this means that in order to ask questions, you'll have to use the QA app on the side. Can you try typing something in there just to make sure you get it? So yes, this means that in order to ask questions, you'll have to use the Q. There we go.
Hello?
Cool.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Am I the only one on the call right now?
Yeah, there are four other viewers, but they aren't like actually in the call yet.
Oh, JK.
All right, hello? Can you hear me? Okay.
Did someone just die at your house?
That wasn't my house. Someone may have
That
just.
wasn't me.
Okay.
Oh, here, I can mute myself too, somewhere.
Um, I guess we'll give it like a few more minutes till 9:15, and then we'll jump in to and get started. Okay, so I guess we'll go ahead and get started then. It looks like it's just going to be you two for now. So before I jump in, I want to ask both of you if there's anything specific that you want me to cover. I was going to go over like the basic format and outline, but were there any specific questions that you had that I should make sure I get to before I start?
I didn't have anything in particular because I'm new to consulting, so I just kind of wanted to get a general overview.
Okay. Court, I was just asking them if they had any specific questions that I should make sure I hit while I'm going over this. Or I'm going to do a general overview, but there's anything specific that you wanted me to touch on.
Anything's fine.
Jennifer, just
Yeah,
just making sure.
yeah, like
Okay.
just kind of like framework. How do you start? How do you navigate?
Yeah. So I guess there's really two things then that I'll probably go over. First is the actual what the interviews are like the process for those interviews, and then second, I'll talk some about how you can actually practice and some of the tools that I use to do that. So, starting off with the actual process, when you go into a case interview, like in an office visit or if you do doing the first one at your school, usually the first thing won't be the actual case. You'll start off with fit or personal experience interview questions, and those are the general, like, tell me about a time when you led a group, tell me about a time when you faced a conflict, all those types of questions. I'm not gonna really talk about those because there's tons of information like online, and they're not. I wouldn't say straightforward, but you can practice those without. Those are easier to practice. I will say though, definitely make sure you do spend time practicing them because they will like drill you on those stories. Like you should be able to probably speak for about 10 to 15 minutes about whatever story it is, even though you're not going to do that initially, but they're going to ask a ton of questions and a ton of detail about whatever it is that you tell them. So you want to make sure you have all of that covered. Like, tell me about a time when. Okay, so the next thing is once you actually start the interview. There's really four steps of the like case interview cadence. First is well, I guess after you get the question, you clarify the question, you structure the problem, you analyze the problem, and then you close. So sounds really simple, and each of those steps is pretty well defined. After you get the question, so they'll say to you, our client's an airline looking to expand from the East Coast, doing a line to the from New York to LA. And the first thing you'll do is clarify. So for that one, it'd be pretty straightforward, but you'd want to make sure that you heard and got all the details. So you'd say, I just want to verify that our client is an airline. The really key question here is whether or not they should um, create this new line from New York to LA. And then you would also want to ask if there's any, like, every time you should ask if there's any specific criteria for success, because sometimes they'll have dollar amount figures. They'll say, like, if they can generate 10 million in revenue within the first 2 years, or like if or they might say like we want a 20% return within like 3 or like something like that. They might give you specific number targets that you can try to hit, and if they don't, then you just like then you have to like come up with your own metrics to like think whether or not it's reasonable. But I would say maybe about 20 to 30% of the time you'll have specific numbers that you need to go for. Once you clarify and you have an understanding of what the problem actually is, that's when you go into the structure of your problem. So you would say, okay, that sounds good. Can I take a few moments to structure my thoughts? And what you'll want to do is literally write out the structure that you would use to approach this problem, like a market entry type problem. So does somebody want to like take a few seconds and think about what are the areas you would look at if you were deciding whether or not to have an airline go and open up a new airline route from New York to LA? Like what are the segments or the categories of things you would consider?
I'll probably want to see like how much competition there is in that sector because it will make sense for me to get involved if I'm not gonna make any money, or if my excuse me, if my competitor already has already has a good what's the word I'm thinking of? Like my competitors are doing really well in that space.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I think you would also want to look at where you're at, so what your market share is, or what the market share of your competitors are like too, as well as the resources that are available.
So to us or to the competitors? What are you?
Say it again.
Are you saying resources available to us or to the competitors?
I guess what resources we have to enter the market.
Okay.
So our position.
Yeah, that sounds good. Anything else?
Would you want to look at the resources your competitors have so you can see how you match up?
Potentially, but I think that would be covered in what Shinola is it? It's Shinola.
Yeah, Shino's fine.
Okay, so what Shino said in for competition, that would probably be covered there is like their market share and what kind of capabilities they have generally. Okay. Wait, Jennifer, do you have something else?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. So those are two really good things that you would definitely want to look at. The competition of both and our internal capabilities. Like, are we physically capable of doing this? But a few other things you'd probably want to consider, like the actual like profitability of this. So like, well, can we make money doing it? Like, how much does it cost us to do a flight versus how much can we make per flight? Um, what's the market size for this? So like, how many people are flying from New York to LA during any given year, and like, how much of that do we think we can capture? Um, so like those kind of things you would think about for a general market entry. So with based on what you said and what I added, you would say something like, give me one second. Market. What's the last one I said? Oh, profitability. Okay, so you say something. Say you would say something along the lines of, there are like. Actually, let me draw this out so I can actually show you what it would look like. Okay. Sorry, one second. I'm actually drawing this out like I would during the interview. So I can show you how this this what the tree looks like.
Mom, I love you so much.
This year.
God bless you, America.
But you can see
Sprinkles.
a lack of
And God bless America.
tip off.
Well, it's a big day, and you might be getting that.
Wow.
All of a sudden, it's just right. It's been a consistent play.
Is that Kimberly? No, yo le dije a Kimberly. She said Kimberly. Mommy, that's the yeah, mom. Right.
Okay, so you guys see this?
That's not potatoes.
So basically, what this is
No.
here is I actually lay out those. I lay out all four of those sections that I would look at if I were going to want to do this. So I would say, in the way way I want to approach this problem is I would think about it. What would I need to believe to be true in order for us to make this new route? First off, the market for it would be large enough and growing to support a new entrant. Then there would need to be no major barriers to entry, which includes what the competitive environment is currently like, and how hard it would be to compete against them. Then see if we have the physical capabilities in order to enter this market. Can we get the terminal space? Do we have the planes to the planes and the ability to actually do it? And then finally look at how profitable it is. Like, do we actually make money on a per flight basis or throughout the course of the year if we enter this market? Does that make sense? So like you lay out what exactly you would do if you wanted to do this. So like if I were to say, actually after this I was gonna have all this like walk through an example case. But does that make sense of how that at least opening part is set up, where you take a second, you clarify the question, you get any, make sure there's no specific criteria for success, and then you structure your problem. Like, what are the areas you'll need to look at in order to like answer the given question? Any questions about so far? Okay. So after you go through that process where you structure, there's really two routes that it can take from there. Either it's going to be a candidate-led case or it's going to be an interviewer-led case. In the candidate-led case, after you give them that structure, they'll say, okay, which one of those is the most important? Where do you want to start? And then you'll just begin looking, asking questions and looking for information within like whichever column you decide is like the most important or where you want to start with. Then if it's an interviewer-led case, they'll say, okay, yeah, that sounds good, and then they'll like begin asking you completely not unrelated questions, but questions that don't necessarily come from your structure, if that makes sense. So they'll say, yeah, that sounds like a good approach. So we did some analysis and we found out the overall market size is like, I don't know, like 10 million flights per year total, and we think we can, actually that's huge, doesn't matter. 10 million flights per year, and we think we can capture 5% of that market in the first year, 3% of what we hadn't captured the next year, then 4% of what we hadn't captured in the third year. What's the total market share that we're going to be able to capture over those first 3 years? For example, like they'll ask you specific questions based on what you have. Or they might brainstorm like, what are some of the competitive risks that we could take, or like how should we consider our capabilities? Like they'll ask you very specific questions and like guide you through the process of the case. So that's why it's like an interviewer-led case versus the candidate-led case is where you say, okay, I want to start looking at the market size, and then you like go down and like how figure out how you're going to think about market size, and then you'll say, okay, now that we have that information, I want to like take a look at the barriers to entry. So like, what does our competition look like? Are there any regulatory issues? Like, you drive the case from that standpoint. And really that's what the analysis portion is. For the candidate-led case, you basically what you want to do is you want to go down a branch and like ask until you can like give a yes or no answer to whatever question that branch is supposed to answer. So in this case, where the first one was, is the market large and growing? So you would say in order to figure that out, you want to estimate the size of the market. Then you would like talk about how you would do that. And once you have an answer, you can say, now that we know the answer to this question, either is a yes or no, then we can like take a look at some of these other aspects also. Does that make sense for that so far?
Yeah, you're good.
Sorry, I just want to make sure. Yeah, and then after I'm even though I am kind of like glossing over the analysis part, this is probably like the most important part of the actual case. It's like where a large portion of the work is done, is when you're actually like doing this analysis, asking questions. As you're going through the data and asking questions, think out loud as much as possible, but they shouldn't be your first thoughts. Like when you're thinking out loud, it should be a structured version of your initial thoughts. Like, it's not stream of consciousness. It's more so like you walking them through and explaining every step and every thought process you have, but in a way that makes it so it's really easy to follow, if that makes any sense at all. And as you're asking these questions, make sure that you're explaining why you want an answer. So don't ask something like, trying to think what's a good example for this case. Don't just say, okay, what's the regulatory environment like? Because that's a really broad and vague question, right? So, or you could say a better question would be something like, I have an hypothesis that if there's major regulations on flights from New York to LA that could impact our capabilities to enter this market, do you have information on if there's any regulations pertinent to this new flight path that we're going into? Do you understand how it's like asking for the same kind of information, but the second one's a lot more specific about what you're going for, and you're not just like fishing for information. actually, the better question would be, like, a better example of fishing would be like, can you tell me about the barriers to entry into this market? Like, you want to make sure if you ask something, the interviewer knows why you want that and how that information would change your answer. And if you can't think to yourself, you don't know how this information would change your answer, then you probably don't need to ask it, right? Because it's all about being as efficient as possible with this time. Because you have like 30 to 45 minutes, and even though that sounds like a lot of time, you actually don't have that long to go through and do everything that you need to do. Okay, let's see. Open structure, or clarify structure, analysis. And then finally, after you analyze the problem, you'll have, as you've been going along, you should have been taking note of the key points that you've been getting. So after you say, okay, yeah, the market is large and growing. Okay, there's no major barriers to entry. We have the internal capabilities, and it'll be profitable. Like, as you're doing it, then they'll say something along the lines of, okay, the CEO of this airline, or like the CFO, whoever your client contact is going to come and talk to you, and he wants to hear what you have so far. And basically, what you need to do here is first off, make sure you give a recommendation, and you want to sum up like why that recommendation is the case. And this should actually be kind of like a presentation, right? You should structure it. You can take a second to like think about how you want to structure your closing, and give it in such a way that it comes across as confident, that you are assured in what you're talking about, and that you know what's really going on. And there's a format that you should use for every time you close, pretty much no matter what, because it's kind of like, it's called like answer first, right? So you'll say like this is pretty much exactly like the exact words you'll want to use. I based on the information we've found in this case, I think that you should do X for 3 reasons. First, this is the first reason. Second, this is the second reason. And third, this is the third reason. And for those reasons, I think that entering this market is doing X is a good idea. Then you would say the risks associated with this are like 1 or 2 risks. And then my next steps, like if you were to come back in and look at this, the next thing you'd want to do is then whatever the next step is. Does that make sense? Like how that's structured? So in the context of this airline case, you would say, I think we should create this new flight path for 4 reasons. First, the market is large and growing. Second, there's no major competition. Like, it's very fragmented in this area. Third, we have the capabilities to get the planes and to get the terminals that we need to do this. And fourth, it's actually profitable on a per flight basis if we fly during the right times of year. And for those reasons, I think that it would make sense to create this new airline. I think the major risk of going into this, if for some reason another major player enters the market at the same time, then the competitive environment could really change. And if I were to come back in, like my next steps, like, yeah, I'd really want to take a closer look at the cost structure for this, because if we don't have a good idea of what the cost structure is, then it may not be as profitable on a per flight basis, and that may change our decision. Does that make sense? Like how that's structured and laid out in such a way that they know what your answer is and what all those supports are. And then you want to make sure that you do the risk and next steps, because that's that kind of separates like an okay candidate from like a really good candidate, because they're actually thinking about what's wrong with what I'm going to do, and then like what should I do next. Because if you don't say it initially, I can guarantee you they're going to ask you. They'll say, okay, you just say those 4 points. They'll say, okay, are there any risks associated with going this strategy? I 100% guarantee you they will. Does that make sense? Any questions so far?
No, that makes a lot of sense.
Okay. The only other thing about cases that you probably want to spend some time thinking about is estimation questions. So you can either get these as like a first round or early round interview in of itself, or you probably will more likely to find them as part of an interview. So that'll be, for example, if they say, what's the market for airplane flights in the United States? like as part of this last one, right? So, does anyone want to walk me through how they would begin to think about that problem?
So I just started reading Case in Point, so I have an idea of like what's expected. So this kind of question is like it's an individual question. So you start off by thinking, all right, there are 300 million people in the U.S., and
Yeah.
you can say maybe on average, say like maybe 40% like travel like very regularly, and then maybe that's about it. No, I'm gonna switch it to a much easier number, say like 10%. I don't know if that's a good estimate. Uh, which is what 10%.
If I could add on to that, this is Jennifer, by the way.
Yeah.
I always struggle with that part too, actually. Like, how do you know how to make good estimates if you have absolutely no idea? Like, say you want to go with 40, like, how do you know 40 makes sense?
Well, okay, so what I usually do is actually it's pretty similar to doing a case. So you'll start off with a structure first. So you'll say we'll filter it down. We'll start with the number of people in the United States, and then we'll divide them into groups of people who travel a lot, people who travel a few times a year, and then people who don't travel at all. And then for those groups of people, they're each going to do X number of flights per year. Yeah, like on a per year basis, and then we multiply the number of people in each group times the number of flights that they do. And so like that structure, like that made sense. And then once they know that you're thinking about it in the right way, like I can just make up after that, like the numbers aren't as important. So like let's say if I say 300 million people and then like 20% travel a lot, 20% don't ever travel and 60% travel some of the time. So for 300 million, 20% is 60 million and 60% is 120 million. Is that right? No, that's not right, is it? 180 million. 60% is 180 million, I think. Crap. 6 times 3 is. Yeah, yeah. Okay, that's 180 million. Sorry, I wasn't writing any then. So if we have 60 million in the for 60 million in the group who flies a lot, 180 million in the group who flies a few times a year. So for the 60 million, let's say they fly 10 times a year. So that's 600 million flights that they'll do. And then let's say for the group that flies only a few times a year, let's say they fly twice a year. And that's another 360 million. So that's 600 million plus 360 million. That's like 960 million. And since we assume that everyone else doesn't do it at all, I think you can round that up some and just say approximately even million flights per year, just to make it a probably more realistic number. Does that make sense? So like the numbers themselves didn't matter. It was more about the fact that you could follow what I was doing as I was doing it.
What if they question your numbers? What if they're like, oh, 20% sounds kind of off? What would you do then?
Um, Honestly, you just kind of bullshitted at that point. If they said your 20% sounds off, I would say, well, I just was basing that off of kind of the people I know and how much they travel. Is there a number that you think would make more sense, right? Like so, you don't know. They would be expect you to know like this information ahead of time. Like no one knows it. It's just more about the thought process. Like that structure part in my mind is more important than the actual numbers you use. I would say it is important to make sure you get the number, like once you start using numbers, to make sure your math is right. But like the numbers that make up the actual math, that's not that important. Does that make sense?
Mhm. All right, thank you. Could you maybe do another example?
Of an estimation question?
Yeah, yeah, just to hear it again.
Okay, if somebody wants to give me a market size to do, I can think of it for a second.
Um, I think if does anybody else have a question, I guess they would want to give? No? Okay. So I guess one that I heard recently was calculate or estimate the amount of gum that is chewed in the United States.
The amount of gum. Okay. So, if I give you a second to structure my thoughts here. Are we looking for a revenue amount or just a like sticks of gum type number?
We can look at sticks of gum.
Okay, so the way I would think about this is first I would look at the entire U.S. population, and then I would break them down by age group. And if I would think that the older someone is, the less likely they are to chew gum. So I would break the U.S. population into like probably like 5 year segments, and for each of those 5 year segments, I would say you chew a certain number of sticks of gum, uh, I guess per year, based on which age. Then I would add all those up together to get an estimate of how much gum is chewed overall in the United States. Does that sound like a reasonable approach to take here?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Okay. So
Yeah.
if you have that, let's assume that a person lives on average to be 75, and if we then also assume that ages are evenly distributed, that there's going to be 4 million people per year. So like if there are 4 million people who are 1 year old, 4 million people who are 30-year old, and I know that it's not a perfect distribution, but this will allow us to do these calculations a little more simply. So if we divide all these age ranges out, we get 1 to 5, 5 to 10, 15. Okay, and actually, now that I think about it, after 20, from 25 on, assume that they chew like the same, like all of them chew about the same amount of gum, relatively. So we'll say that 25 to 75 is the last group. So from 1 to 5, I would imagine that if they wouldn't really chew any gum during a year because they're just like not really old enough to be like buying gum in school yet. Of gum for that group, and then for 5 to 10 year old, well, I would say like once you start getting in school, then that's when you start doing it. But it would go up probably up until teens, then like go back down after that. So for 5 to 10 years old, if I'm thinking about the kids that I know who chew gum, let's say they chew gum like twice a month, so that's 24 sticks of gum in a given year for a kid that's 5 to 10 years old. Then for 10 to 15, I don't have an exact like well sure how it is, but I would assume that would go up from the 5 to 10 year age group. So if we say 30 sticks of gum per year for the people in this group, and then for the 15 to 20 age group, um, I think we could go up even more, and let's say um, like 35 sticks of gum per year, and then for the 25 and for the 50 years that are left, let's say they go back down to 25 sticks of gum per year. So we have 0 from 1 to 5. We'll say 25 from 5 to 10 just to make it even. 30 from 10 to 15, 35 from 15 to 20, and then 25 for that 50-year time period. Now, since each of those time periods is 5 years and there's 4 million people per year, that means there's 20 million people for each of those groups. So there's 20 million people in each group. And then we can multiply, and Archie's, to be clarify, there's 20 million people for the 5 year period, but then for the period, there's going to the rest of the United States. That was going to be significantly different. Multiply that 20 million times those gum numbers that we came up with earlier. So for the 5 to 10 year old group, if we 10 million is 250 times 2 is going to be 500 million. Then 20 million times 30 million, so 30 million times 10 million is 300 million times 2 is 600 million. Then 20 million times 35 million, 350, that's 700 million. And then that's 25 times 200 million, 25 times is 2.5 billion, so that's 5 billion pieces of gum. Actually, that sounds reasonable. So 5 billion. So if we add all these up together, that's 1.3 billion, 1.8 billion plus the 5 billion. I'm getting 6.8 billion exactly. So let's say approximately 7 billion sticks of gum during any given year. Did that all make sense? And whether actually that sounds super high, honestly, but I guess not because like they come like what, like 14 to a pack. So yeah, that's probably not super high. But that's way more important than the actual number. Does that make sense?
I'd say it makes sense, yeah.
Any questions about like what I did or like why I made certain decisions as I was going through that?
The only thing I would wonder is, do you think that they'd ask a question of something so small in a range that big, so something as small as gum, but in the range of the United States? Or would it be more like how much gum in a city, or how much gum, something like that?
Well, actually, I would think the United States would actually be easier because you have that $300 million people to start off with, and you can like play with it from there. Does that make sense? Because like even if it was a smaller city, I would probably use the same approach. I would just say like there's like 2 million people in the city, and then you have to like break it down that way instead. If that makes sense. Any other questions?
Yeah, I have one. Like, how
Yeah.
do you go about those questions where like it doesn't have anything to do with population? Usually, like the really weird ones. Like I was looking at one. I was looking at one just now. Like, how much does a 747 weigh?
Yeah.
Like, how do you go
So
about structuring the response?
during a case interview or during a consulting interview, you're not going to get a question like that. I was actually worried about a lot about that also when I was first began prepping, but like they, at least I guess maybe it's a recent thing, but they realize that those types of questions don't really judge your problem solving ability because you're thrown off by the context, right? Like you'll never be on a client site and then have them ask you how many pennies does it take to fill the Tower of Pisa. Like that's never going to happen at a client. Does that make sense? So like they ask like a client could ask you like if they make ice salts for roads and they're thinking about entering the chemical road treatment market, they could ask you like what's the size of the chemical road treatment market in the US. Does that make sense? Like so that's why they ask these market sizing questions because it's something that could actually happen on a client side. Like, of course, you can go back and do data, but like if you just want like a back of the napkin type calculation, that could actually come up, and fairly frequent actually. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Any other
Yeah, that
questions?
makes a lot of sense. I never thought of it like that. I remember once when I was like freshman year, someone asked me how many mirrors, or no, how many windows were there in New York City. But like as a consultant, we wouldn't need to know that, would we? They wouldn't ask us
Well,
how many.
okay, so that would actually I think is a bit more reasonable. So like if you were like let's say you work for a window cleaning company, right? And they want to
Huh?
know what's the market for window cleaning in the city, and to know that you would have to get to how many square feet of windows are there. So how would you approach that? Like what was the approach you would use to break that down, like structurally, not necessarily the numbers?
I was thinking about it earlier, so I was thinking I would break down the size of the buildings in New York City to maybe like you have tall and then medium and then low, and then how many
Okay.
windows on average there are in these each round, and then I guess do math and multiply them by percentages and
Yeah,
get my number.
that's probably exactly what I would have done. I mean, I hope that would be a fine answer because that would have been my approach. So, yeah. Um, any other questions? Okay, so then I guess since we've gone over the basics of what case interviews are, like how to actually go through the process, just talk for a brief moment about how to practice them. For the actual analysis part, there's really the only way to really practice that is to actually do cases with people. So like find friends, reach out to other people at MLT, reach out to me, and like run cases with giving cases because when you're running cases, when you're giving cases, they do actually like go through the process. The second one helps you figure out like what it's like to be on the other end, like we were looking for, and when you know as you're going through the interview to do what they want, if that makes sense. And then for the opening and closing portions, at like without doing an entire case, or yourself. So if you like read this week, you can, as you're reading the article, this problem, like what are the areas I would look at, and then after you read the article, you can say, okay, how would I close this? Like if I were to give a closing for this one, like my recommendation, my points, and then my next step and my risks, like what would those be, and like how would I deliver that? Does that make sense? So you can, those parts can be practiced on their own. The actual, you're only really practice with other people. A really great resource that I've had that like helps you go from knowing the basics to like understanding of what like a really good case sounds like is, did all of you get access to the Dropbox not Dropbox, the OneDrive folder that's in the GroupMe?
Yeah.
Okay, so in there, there's a folder called LMOS that has the look over my shoulder audio files. And basically what those are is like Victor Chang went through a bunch of cases with people, and he pulled out a bad case, an okay case, and like a really good case for the same case. So you can like hear what like a great case sounds like, if that makes sense. And because there's like certain things that happen and certain things like the way things are said, and he pauses the cases, like points out when things are really good and when you should take note. I would say that after you do your first couple of cases, that I think actually took me from like okay to being like good at cases, because you really get an idea of how you should sound, what's like a good way to do it.
Where was that again?
So in the GroupMe, it's like near the very top of the group. Give me a second. I can probably I'll share the link again.
Okay. And you said it was look over my shoulder?
Yes. It's in the file. It's labeled LMOS. LOMS. Yeah, LOMS. But I will share that to you in just a moment. Case studies. Share. Good link. Okay. Here you go. I just posted again to the GroupMe, so that folder has all of the stuff that I want in it. You can download it from there. Just don't delete anything from there, because that's like is directly connected to like all of my stuff, and I don't have another copy of that. But yeah. Any more questions before I head out, or before we finish up? Because that was everything that I had planned to go through.
How many like questions like how many windows are there in New York do you think we look at when we do an interview?
I would say by themselves you probably won't get a ton, but like maybe like 40% of cases ish would have a portion of that in there, to where you have to estimate the size of a market. Yeah.
So it'd be like a part.
The part of it. Yes, exactly. So like for this one, like the first question, like the market is large and growing, they may just say, how would you think the size of the market's like? You know what I mean? And then that's when you like go into the estimation question.
Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. Well, if any of you need anything else, have any more questions at all, feel free to reach out, and I'm happy to run cases with any of you at any point in time, especially as you begin ramping up and prepping for interviews and those kinds of things. Just let me know if there's anything I can do.
All right, man. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Have a good night.